Universal Casualty, Super Q, los Miami Dolphins y tú, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Son los Dolphins, nuestros Miami Dolphins, el team número 1 en toda la nación. Y son ellos orgullo de Miami y de todos los latinos en la capital del sol. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Este año no me hablen de los Redskins, no me hablen de los Chargers, ni de los Dallas Cowboys, porque los Dolphins son número 1 y lo demostrarán al llegar al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Nuestra línea está mejor que nunca y nuestra defensiva fue siempre la mejor. Y es por eso que yo no tengo duda que los Miami Dolphins ganarán el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, con los Miami Dolphins, rumbo al Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Con los Miami Dolphins me voy para el Super Bowl. Universal Casualty y Super Q, los primeros. Bueno, caballeros, todo el mundo que cante con nosotros. Dame una D, dame una O, dame una L, dame una P, una H, una I, una N, una S, que es lo que tenemos, Miami Dolphins. Me voy para el Super Bowl. 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 Me voy para el Super Bowl.
You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team Dolphin fans. Football is mighty rough. Winning gets awful tough. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins.
Hello, Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, sponsored by BetUS, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
Well, Brain, listen, normally this is where we start the show off with some witty banter and we go back and forth for at least a few seconds before we dive right into the news. But I feel like at this point, there's not a whole lot of point in dancing around it. We should just dive right in because it's a pretty tough day to be a Miami Dolphin fan, all things considered. So we're going to dump is probably the appropriate Freudian slip there. But we're going to jump right into it tonight. But first, a reminder real quick. Follow us on Twitter at Amplified to Rock, at Aaron the Brain. That's at Aaron the Brain. The show is at Same Old Dolphins. You can download, rate, review, and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, everywhere that you get your podcasts. We invite you to subscribe to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. Visit DolphinsTalk.com each and every day. It's your one-stop shop for all things Miami Dolphins. And, of course, thanks to our sponsors, True Classic Tees and Manscaped. Head to manscaped.com and use the promo code DolphinsTalk for 20% off of your order and free shipping. And go to trueclassic.com, put in the promo code DolphinsTalk, and you're going to get a 25% discount on some really great T-shirts and sweatshirts and hoodies and pants and all kinds of good stuff over there. So check that out. So we had planned for this to be a show all about how the Dolphins lost their fourth straight game to the Green Bay Packers and how this season is rapidly turning into a side-by-side comparison with the 1993 Miami Dolphins season, which is another example of a time where the Dolphins started out really, really hot, looked like one of the best teams in the league, only to have a horrible collapse down the stretch. And it seems like that's what we are in the midst of right now. And so we were going to have a talk about that just on its merits. And we are still going to talk a little bit about the game with the Packers and where this season is going right now. But we got yet another curveball thrown at us just a few hours before we started recording and before we went live here on Monday night. And that news is that on Monday afternoon, Miami Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa was once again placed into the NFL's concussion protocol. Apparently he was showing some symptoms on Monday and after the game on Sunday, and they went ahead and put him back into the concussion protocol. We don't know for a fact that he has been diagnosed with a concussion, although, you know, from my non-scientific opinion, it seems very difficult for me to believe that they saw him demonstrating concussion symptoms and then did not diagnose him with a concussion. I suppose that's possible. I suppose if he doesn't actually have a concussion, there's a possibility that he could be cleared on Tuesday or Wednesday and, you know, still be in line to start this weekend against the New England Patriots. But in all likelihood, at this point, I think it's safe to assume that he's not going to be playing this week and that he once again has a concussion. And that really opens up a whole lot of questions here that I think as a Miami Dolphin fan, you need to ask. Obviously, Brain, first and foremost, we need to look at Tua, the man, the person, the individual. I think that's the biggest concern. If he in fact does have a concussion, whether this is his second concussion of the year or his third concussion of the year, it is a significant problem because concussions, unlike other injuries, are one of those injuries that once it happens, it's more likely to happen again. And once it happens the next time, it's more likely to happen again. And so now you've got a quarterback with a history of concussion problems. And that's just putting it bluntly. That's what it is at this point. And so I think first and foremost, the biggest concern is for Tua and Tua's health and what is the right thing for him to do he's spent his entire life building to this moment to be an NFL quarterback. He's here. He's an NFL quarterback now. Whether or not that is the right thing for him to continue to do is a conversation for him, his family, and his doctors to make that decision if this is a situation where he's dealing with a concussion. So let's start there, Brain, before we go any further and how this impacts the team and, decisions that they're going to be making down on the road. Let's start there. It's a pretty significant and pretty sad blow to Tua Tagovailoa, the man.
Yeah, I mean, look, first off, let's make the distinction. He's in the protocol. He hasn't been diagnosed with a concussion at this point as we record at 8:35 p.m. on Monday evening. So we'll get some clarity on this. But obviously, if he is diagnosed with a concussion and you couple that with the fact that he had a concussion earlier in the season, you have to put in jeopardy, or you have to put into question whether or not he's going to step on the football field the rest of this year. And then obviously, what this means for him as far as his career and, livelihood and what he wants to do with the rest of his life. This is just one of those things where inherently it's part of the game. And it's something that these guys all sign up for, and that it can happen. And at some point, you see guys every year that walk away from the game because of the risk or because of the injuries. So that's a decision that, is between Tua and his family and doctors, and really not anything that I feel comfortable speculating on, and I don't think that we should spend much time on it. I think that we should mention it before we really get into how it impacts the Dolphins, just so that it kind of puts everything into context. But then from the rest of this conversation on, I think we should just focus on what does this mean for the Dolphins? What does this mean for Tua as a football player and the Dolphins for this 2022 season, for the 2023 season and beyond?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely the right place to go, and let's do it right now. Because as I look at it in terms of this season, this is the short term. This is, the fact of the matter is we're going to get into the game the Dolphins played against the Packers and what that does to everybody's hopes for this season. But the fact of the matter is the Dolphins find themselves with 2 games left to play, controlling their own destiny, which is ultimately, as an NFL team, that's what you want to do. I mean, ideally, with 2 weeks left, you want to have already clinched your spot. You already want to have money in the bank, which at this point the Dolphins don't have, but they control their own destiny. So they're still right in it in terms of what this season could ultimately be. And so you've got to look at the situation as it is, which is right now with Tua being in concussion protocol, the assumption would be that he's going to remain in the protocol for the remainder of this week, or at least the majority of this week, and likely is not going to get any practice in. Therefore, safe to assume Dolphins are probably not trotting him out there on Sunday. Now, if he gets cleared in the next day or two, I would say that's a possibility things change. You seem to disagree. You seem to think that if he's cleared anytime before Sunday, he's playing.
Oh, yeah. Look, if he's cleared and he doesn't go out there and play with your season on the line, then what the hell are we doing here?
I mean, that's a fair question.
Yeah, if he's not cleared by the doctors, then obviously you're going to say if he's diagnosed with a concussion, if he's not cleared, then obviously you're not playing him, and you can call into question whether or not he's going to play again for the rest of the year. Perfectly fine with that logic. But if you're telling me that the doctors are saying that he doesn't have a concussion and that he's cleared to play, after everything that we've been through this year, you have to believe that the doctors are not putting Tua at risk. They're not, BSing this thing. So if the doctors come out and they clear him and he is cleared to play and we do not play him, then what the hell are we even doing here? Just call it quits. If he's cleared, you got to play him. Bottom line, 100%, period, over, end of sentence.
And you're sticking with that no matter when in the week it happens. If it happens Sunday morning at 9 a.m., he plays even though he hasn't practiced at all this week?
He's practiced all season. Your season is on the line, and you're going to tell me that because your starting quarterback, who's supposed to be the franchise quarterback that you're building around, didn't practice for a few days, that you're going to feel comfortable going into New England with Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson? No, if he's cleared, you absolutely play him. I don't care if it's the quarterback. I don't care if he's a defensive lineman, a wide receiver, a running back. For every key player on the team, if they are cleared to play on Sunday, they are playing. Your season is on the line.
Fair enough. All right. So you're saying if he's cleared, he's playing. I think that's probably the right move, even though Mike McDaniel has shown, this tendency to be like, no, we're going to give this quarterback, all of the reps at QB as the starter. It's going to be Teddy Bridgewater this week. That he has shown a thing that we've game planned around this quarterback. Now we've seen how well that's worked out.
How's that worked out?
Literally, he has not gotten to play an entire game with the exception of, it's really been Tua out there the whole time. And when it's been Tua as the starter, whatever, with the exception of the Cincinnati game, but you had the game against the Jets where Bridgewater goes down on the first play and there's the phantom concussion that happens there. He gets pulled. The following week, you had Skylar Thompson starting the game and he goes out in the first half and you end up with Teddy Bridgewater back in there. So they've yet to be able to execute a game plan for having a backup quarterback be their guy the full game. So, I mean, I get your point there. The other part of this is if he doesn't get cleared, obviously, if he's cleared at any point and your season is still alive, you're putting Tua back in there, right? That's clear. I mean, as far as based on what you just said, if Tua is cleared at any point this week, you're putting him in there. If he has to miss this game because he's not cleared, but he's cleared before the season finale against the Jets, or if he's not cleared for that game, but then the Dolphins make the playoffs and he's cleared in time for the wild card game, you're obviously putting him back in, right?
If he's cleared and he's not playing, he's not your starting quarterback.
That is a very good point.
Bottom line.
I mean, that's as succinctly as you can put it. If he's cleared and you're not putting him in the game because fear of, and I think that's what leads us to the next question, right? I mean, we can talk about what it would mean to have Teddy Bridgewater as your starting quarterback, and we will have plenty of opportunity to talk about that. That's not what this show is about. We'll talk about what that means for matchups, et cetera, going forward. But the fact of the matter is, yeah, I think that's a fair point. If you have this guy and because of his concussion situation, you're afraid to put him out here, then that leads to the very next question, which is what the Dolphins do next. Next year is Tua's fourth year of his rookie deal. The Dolphins have to decide before the start of the season whether or not they're going to exercise the fifth-year option on Tua, right? Or extend him. I think at this point, it is
that was never in the cards.
I think regardless, even if this concussion issue hadn't come up this week, the Dolphins were never extending Tua Tagovailoa prior to next season. Was never going to happen. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say it was never going to happen. But unless the quarterback that had showed up in the fourth quarter of that Baltimore game continued to play all season long at that level and put up those kind of numbers, that was the only thing that was going to have him looking at an extension prior to next season starting.
Still wouldn't have happened.
And I disagree, but that's beside the point. The fact of the matter is that you didn't get that kind of play. And so now the Dolphins are faced with this situation where they have to decide whether to exercise the fifth-year option. The way things were going, and based on how this team has managed their draft assets and salary cap, I think it's fair to say that we were heading towards this team exercising the fifth-year option on Tua ahead of next season. And he was definitely, I mean, as it stands, unless he walks away from the game, he's your starting quarterback next year for the Miami Dolphins, unless he walks away or is deemed unable to play anymore, something like that happening. Tua Tagovailoa is the starting quarterback for this team next year. I mean, or he's going to be here. I would be very surprised if the Dolphins, knowing what they need to do to make this team, well, I should clarify that. Let me clarify that. And this is something that we're going to touch on later. If Mike McDaniel is still the head coach of the Miami Dolphins next season, which I think is a bigger question than many folks would like to acknowledge. Not because I believe that he should not be the head coach of the Dolphins next year, but because this is a clown show organization, and we'll get to that in a minute. But if Mike McDaniel is still the head coach of this team next year, and Tua Tagovailoa is able to play football and is willing to continue to play football, he's your starting quarterback next year. I don't think there's a question about that. What I believe there is now a legitimate question about is whether or not the Dolphins are exercising that fifth-year option, because how do you continue to make an investment into a player who and again, this is not being subjective here, I think objectively has given you mixed results at best. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay, great. So you would say it's fair to say that Tua has given you mixed results at best. We've seen what he can be at his absolute best, and we've also seen what he can be at his absolute worst. And we've seen a lot of what it looks like when he's in the middle of that. Okay. And the Dolphins were heading into this offseason having to make a decision based solely on the mixed play that he has shown about whether or not they should exercise that fifth-year option. That's what they were juggling. Okay. That's what they were looking at. And then what has sort of complicated that was obviously losing the draft picks and then making this trade for Bradley Chubb and going all in on this season has minimized the assets that they have remaining to make any kind of maneuvering should Tua not have been absolutely the guy this season, right? If he didn't prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that he was the guy this season, you wanted to have that ability to maneuver around and make some moves, to do something else, to have an alternate plan for next season. When they started making these moves, they brought in Chubb. They obviously the tampering thing, they lost, the assets started to go away. So that put them in a position where now they're looking at this offseason with very few options in terms of pivoting away, which is why I believe that they were heading towards exercising that fifth-year option, because they really didn't have a choice. This is the guy, he's in-house, he's going to be the guy for the next 2 years. Exercise that fifth-year option, you figure out what to do. At that point, fifth-year option, you bring somebody else in, and maybe you don't have him as the starter, whatever. You can start the pivot away at that point. Now, they're looking at the same results, the same mixed results that they've seen from Tua the player, and now you've got, I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock in the idea of quote unquote injury prone, because it's obviously the massive injury that he was coming off of in his final year in college is one thing. He had the rib injury, he had the finger injury, some of those things he may have been able to play through, whatever. Those things are what they are. But the concussion thing is real. And if you've got a guy who is going to be your franchise quarterback and you want to put him out there, and now you have questions about his durability in that regard, you have to make that question of whether or not it is worth it to continue to invest financially, just from a business perspective, whether it makes smart business sense to continue to invest in this guy and put yourself on the hook for millions and millions of dollars going forward for a player who is supposed to be your franchise quarterback, who may or may not be able to stand out there and be the player that you want him to be, right? And again, as I said before, it's not like, oh, you broke your wrist in the past. Oh, you had a hip injury in the past. You're going to be dealing with hip injuries over and over and over again. It's not like that. Concussions are one of those things that once you have it, and once you start to have that problem, they are more and more likely to continue to occur. So my question is for you, Brain, what do the Dolphins do in this situation?
Well, when it comes to the fifth-year option, you're going to wait till the offseason. But as it sits right now, if Tua has a concussion, if he doesn't play the rest of the year, then what we have is the sample size that we have. And we have no more new information to assess, and you just got to go with what you've got. The argument for it is that you have complete control over the contract, and you've got him locked up now for, instead of just for 1 more year, you've got him locked up for 2 more years. And that second year, depends on where the cap is, but you're looking at probably somewhere between $23 to $25 million. Whereas if you don't lock him up, then You go into next year as a contract year. We've talked ad nauseum. The national narrative around Tua all year long is about how one of the biggest reasons why he's played so well this year is because the team believes in him. Well, if they don't give him a 5th-year option, he goes into next year as a contract year, then I think it's fair to say the team doesn't believe in him. So how does that impact his play on the field? And then if he does go out and have a great year, well, then at that point, you've got a contract year hitting the open market situation where you need to negotiate a huge extension and he holds all the cards. Or you can, you can put that off. I mean, because you could always franchise him. You could franchise him in that situation as well. But if you give him the 5th-year option, then you can delay that for one more year. And you've got one more year of evidence before you make that huge of a financial commitment. And the thing is if you don't do it, what's your other option? Like, I mean, at that point, then you're going into, what would have been his 5th year, and you're either giving him a franchise tag and he's going to have a humongous cap number, or you're going to give him a humongous extension, or you're going to go out on the open market and get another quarterback. Well, who's that quarterback going to be? Because we don't have a 1st-round pick. Now, do we use a 2nd-round pick, in this upcoming draft? And do we get lucky? And do we get that guy? I don't know, maybe. With this franchise, I don't know how you have faith that they're going to pull that one off, but I guess it's possible. And then you start looking around the rest of the league. It's like, all right, well, what's the going rate for a starting quarterback? You're going to end up paying more than you're paying for Tua for a cast-off. So who's that going to be? Is that going to be Derek Carr? Is that going to be Jimmy Garoppolo? I mean, we're talking a year further down the line, so we don't know. Is that going to be Matt Ryan? We don't know who that quarterback is, but whoever it is going to be somebody whose team decided that quarterback was not worth holding on to. So I think we're kind of stuck, and you just kind of have to hope that Tua works out of this. The other option, you got a lot of people in the fan base right now that are saying, well, we're going to go after Lamar Jackson. And
Lamar Jackson is not leaving Baltimore unless that entire thing completely falls apart and he has some major falling out. Otherwise, he's getting a franchise tag and he's playing in Baltimore next season. I think holding your breath for Lamar Jackson, as much as I think there's a possibility that would be a good fit, I don't see that happening. I just don't see it realistic. I just cannot imagine Baltimore letting him go. Honestly, if we're going to end up with another quarterback next year, you know who it is? If they're going to bring in another quarterback next season, it's Jimmy Garoppolo. That's your quarterback.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. You're not going to bring in Jimmy Garoppolo, who's going to be more expensive. Like Tua is cheap next year. He's what, like $8 million? Yeah. Like you're not bringing in another quarterback next year unless you are 100% certain that this guy is an upgrade over Tua. And I don't think that exists out there. So I think Lamar Jackson is the interesting name because while Lamar Jackson is certainly not a better thrower of the football than Tua, you could make the argument, well, we can build around the running game and do enough in the passing game with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill because Lamar Jackson is going to make the opposing team have to put 8 guys in the box. And I think there's logic to that sentiment. The problem is the contract. The problem is, he is still under contract with Baltimore and they kind of hold the chips there. But you could maybe finagle something between restructuring contracts and backloading things. You could maybe make that work. But if you do that, you are really kicking the can down the road and saying, we are 1,000,000% all in for next year. And I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that on Lamar Jackson. Like Lamar Jackson, who hasn't proven that he can win in the playoffs. Lamar Jackson that hasn't proven, like, who's been in the league longer and hasn't proven that he can get much farther than Tua. So I think we've got a large enough sample size to know that this offense can work.
Yeah.
But Tua at this point is in that level where he's not the elite of the elite. He might be better than the, replacement level starting NFL quarterback, but you need to have a complete offense around him. And that doesn't just mean an offense that's built for him, where he has great weapons, where he can do a lot of things in the passing game, but that probably means a running game that you can count on week in and week out, and that you can really rely on to where you can say, well, Tua doesn't need to win us this game. And right now, I don't think that we're there with the offense. I've seen signs the last couple of weeks that we could maybe get there. I don't know that the coach believes that we're quite there yet. And that, I think, is, one of the biggest issues that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Right.
But I think as far as, Tua's future, if healthy, if this concussion is not an issue, I think he's the quarterback next year. And I'm at this point, you probably got to give him the 5th-year option. I just think it's the prudent thing to do.
Yeah, I have my doubts about it, frankly, and I guess part of it is going to be, let's just see how this all plays out. I mean, if this guy is banged up and has got a concussion and misses the rest of the season, I mean, it's a significant impact. That is a significant problem. If a dude misses, the rest of the regular season, maybe a playoff game, that's 5.5 games the dude missed because of concussion problems, and that's something that's scary to put him out there. It's to put yourself in a situation where that's what you're going all in on. I mean, so listen, we'll get into the fact of how he's played and how I think this league has caught up to both the head coach and the quarterback, and how they've sort of both failed to make the necessary adjustments to continue to keep the momentum of this team going. But, the fact of the matter is, it is what it is. And this is the situation. And I think above all, it sucks. It sucks because the fact of the matter is that right now for this season, short term, I mean, first of all, it sucks mostly for the player, obviously, and for the person. That sucks that he's dealing with this concussion situation. It's a horrible thing for anybody to have to deal with, and to potentially be having to make the kind of decision to whether or not to continue to play the game that you should theoretically be in the prime of your life ready to do for the next at least 10 years, making a living doing, and to have to sit back and now maybe evaluate whether or not that's the right thing for you to do. That's a tough situation to be in, and that sucks. Nobody should have to be forced to make that kind of decision, and that's disappointing. But it sucks for the Dolphins as well because, like it or not, Tua gives this team the best chance to win. And while I have my doubts as to whether or not this team has the capability to make a run, even if Tua is at full health, based on what I've seen in the last month as teams have adjusted, the fact of the matter is, having Tua out there gives the Dolphins a much better chance than having Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson. We're going to be facing the reality of what it is to have Teddy Bridgewater out there. That's just the truth of the matter. But that it is what it is. It sucks. And this is the situation that we're in, at least probably for this week, unless, of course, Tua is cleared, in which case this was a lot of hemming and hawing over nothing. But we're going to push this conversation off, at least to the offseason, and see how things develop. But let's turn our attention now to this game on Sunday, because this was a 4th consecutive defeat for the Miami Dolphins. And we had talked about going into this game, Brain, that, or I had said on the game that, the Dolphins had not yet had that loss that was like, that is just a brutal, bad loss to have on your record, right? I mean, you put the Cincinnati game, you had the injury, you can chalk up the Jets game and the Vikings game, even though the Dolphins were in both of those games, you can chalk both of those up to the fact that, Dolphins had their game plans get thrown out the window relatively early on, and, whatever, you could chalk it up to that. losing on the road in California to playoff contenders like the 49ers, who are legit one of the best teams in football right now, even with their third string quarterback. You lose to San Francisco, you lose to the Chargers, whatever. You got clowned in that game, but whatever. And then you lose a hard-fought game in Buffalo. Those were losses. You could look at all of that and go, okay, fine. There are reasons for all of that, but there wasn't that horrible loss. Enter Christmas Day, and the Miami Dolphins absolutely put out a brutal, horrible loss to a team that they had no business losing to if they were the contenders that they were making people believe when they were sitting there at 8-3. Okay. They had no business losing this game. It was a game that Green Bay was, quite frankly, trying to give away at times, even late into the game. But the Dolphins failed to do it. How much of that you want to put on Tua's shoulders, I think, is debatable. I mean, it's clear to say that Tua had a large role in it with his performance in the second half of that game, which now you can look at and go, well, was this guy concussed? And that's why his performance dipped. I mean, his first and second half splits are really, really bad. But it's not like that was the only reason that he lost this game. Special teams has been a disaster. How Danny Crossman gets to continue in his role for the last 2 weeks of the season is beyond me, because he has been a disaster. Special teams has been an outright disaster for this team. I think there are more examples in this game of McDaniel's inability to call the game straight. And he's outsmarting himself with some of the play calling. On the opening drive, Dolphins had themselves on a 3rd and 3 down in Green Bay territory, and he makes the decision that we're going to do this pass play down the sideline rather than running the ball, which he was doing so well. The Dolphins were really establishing the run. You talk about having a running game. The Dolphins do have a running game, but their coach seems to get the slightest thing will rattle him and he will move away from it. And then, you find yourselves with the Dolphins trying to pass their way out of every situation. And you talk about how we live and die with the aggressiveness of Mike McDaniel, but we're also living and dying with the aggressiveness of Tua Tagovailoa. And the fact of the matter is, the league has caught up to where this team was when they were tearing apart the Detroit Lions and the Cleveland Browns. The league has caught up. The league has seen what the Dolphins have put on tape. And teams are adjusting to figure out how to slow the Dolphins down. The problem is Mike McDaniel is not adjusting, and Tua Tagovailoa is not adjusting. And I don't know what you could. Well, obviously, the thing that you do with Tua Tagovailoa is not going to play this week. At least that's where it's headed. But right now, it seems like, I don't know. It seems like the Dolphins have been caught up to, and they don't have a counterpunch right now. And so now we're sitting here in kind of in a free fall with 2 weeks left to go.
I think that they have a counterpunch. I think they had a counterpunch against Buffalo. I think they had a counterpunch against Green Bay, and I think they failed to execute. Against Buffalo, I think a lot of it was on the defense, and I think a lot of it was on Mike McDaniel and not sticking with the running game. In this game against Green Bay, I think it was a lot of self-inflicted errors. I look at the fumble at the end of the first half by Raheem Mostert. Humongous play. Like gives Green Bay points at the end of the half, gives Green Bay a chance to tie the game right into the right at the start of the second half. You give and then ultimately the interceptions from Tua. Those weren't a play call. That's not the play call. Like, you look at the first interception that Tua threw. He threw into coverage. It was a very risky throw. He overthrew the guy. The second interception, they've got a nice drive going, and there's a miscommunication with him and Raheem Mostert. Like, it's a bad throw. It's a bad interception. It's on Tua. Like, whether you want to put it on Tua, whether you want to put it on Mostert, I don't care who you put it on. But you're not going to put that one on Mike McDaniel either. The last interception, look, Tua makes a terrible read, makes a terrible decision to throw that ball. He's got two guys wide open, streaking underneath. You got almost 2 minutes left you've got chances for a big chunk play underneath. And he forced it. He pressed. That's something that we've seen where Tua has gotten into trouble since the start of his career, is when a team takes away his first read and he presses and he doesn't move through his progressions. Now, this whole idea that Tua is a one-read quarterback and the league has caught up with him, it's fair. I think there's no doubt coming out of college, when I sat there and I watched every play of this guy's, every snap of his college career, I said he's got two weaknesses. One weakness is that when he goes up against good defenses that take away his first read, he gets into trouble. And two, he sometimes presses and tries to do too much when there's nothing there. There's nothing new here. But we've also seen at times this year Tua go through his progressions and make things happen. He is still, it's a reminder that he is still a young quarterback. He is not a prodigy that has just, is going to play like a 12-year vet in the third year of his career. But it's a reminder that this is a legitimate weakness in his game. It's something that he's improved upon, but he is not yet perfected. And we don't know if he's going to perfect it. That's the whole gamble, because if we could sit here and we could say he's going to perfect it, he's not going to perfect it, he's not going to get better. If we knew he wasn't going to get better, then there would be no conversation to be had. But we've seen him take a significant leap from year 2 to year 3. And we've seen him this season have games where teams have taken away his first read and he has made the adjustment. So I'm not going to sit here and say that definitively Tua can't adjust, Mike McDaniel can't adjust. Everything that needs to be done to fix this is there. It's just a matter of whether or not they're going to do it, whether or not they're good enough to do it consistently and on time. At this point, you want to say, I don't have faith that this team's going to figure it out and turn it around? Well, I don't blame you. Particularly, I don't have that faith. But I'm also not going to sit here and say that Tua's done. He's not the guy. Mike McDaniel is done. He's not the guy. When everything that happened there was very fixable, and if Tua doesn't throw a couple of really dumb interceptions in the fourth quarter of that game, or in the second half of this game, the entire narrative is different, and everybody's talking about how we're going to go into New England and we're going to win. And if we do go into New England and win next week, all of a sudden that narrative is going to shift, even with the results that we currently have. So I'm not going to sit here and be the reactionary guy that, swerves left and right depending on what the Dolphins did on Sunday. What I'll say is it's certainly not trending in the right direction. You certainly have 30 years of Dolphins fandom to be frustrated about and feel like this thing is not going to get right. And I'm not going to blame you for that. That's why we call the show what we call the show. But that said, we got to see a little bit to see how this thing pans out. Now, I'll say this. If Tua is concussed, then probably he should be out for the rest of the year. And if he's out for the rest of the year, then this season is done, because we're not going anywhere with Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson running the show.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say as well. It's like I said earlier. I think the thing is this team's best chance to win is with Tua Tagovailoa at quarterback. Whether you like it or not, that's the situation. Whether you believe he's the guy or not. And I'm going to be sitting here and I'm going to be having a conversation later this week with our friends at Go Time Dolphins, talking about Tua and the way people react to him, because I have tried to be as subjective or as objective as possible when discussing Tua, and I have Earlier this season, I absolutely said that he was playing at an MVP level because earlier this season, the way that he was playing, he deserved to be in that conversation. And then he completely fell off. That was the thing, was we needed to see that kind of level of play with consistency. That was what this season, one of the things that this season was all about. You've surrounded this guy with weapons now. You've put him in an offense that was built to his strengths, which is more than what you could say for the year before. And there were moments, there have been times this season where we absolutely saw him shine. We saw Tua shine. We saw him play at that elite level in this offense that was built for him. But what we have not seen is now that teams have caught up and now that teams have figured it out, we have not seen him yet figure out how to make that adjustment and how to continue to be something that an elite quarterback is. An elite franchise quarterback is going to be able to make that adjustment and do the things that are necessary to help you win a game. And even on games where you don't have your best stuff, you can still find ways to help your team win. That is what an elite quarterback does. And that is not something that we have seen with any kind of consistency from Tua. And I don't think that's unfair to say. It's not to say that we haven't seen it at all, because we have seen it. We have seen glimpses, but you haven't seen it consistently. You haven't seen it week in and week out. And that's why you've got next year and potentially a fifth year after that, if everything is okay with his health, you can continue to evaluate that. But what I don't think we're at a point where we can go yet as an organization is to a point where we can talk about whether or not we're looking at a second contract, because right now we're not at a place where it's, I think, even okay to consider a second contract for Tua at this point, based on this level of play and now with his health concerns. But here's the other thing that I think we need to consider. And I sort of touched on this a little bit early. Mike McDaniel and his Miami Dolphins now find themselves with a record of 8-7 with 2 games to go. Okay. Brian Flores' best season with the Miami Dolphins, he finished 10-6. Last season, Brian Flores with the Miami Dolphins finished 9-8. He got fired. We know that there was a lot more involved in his firing than simply on-field performance. But the fact of the matter is this team is significantly better from a roster perspective than this team was last season or the year before that, right? That's fair?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I believe that Mike McDaniel is not the coach of the Miami Dolphins next season if the Dolphins fail to make the playoffs. And I am not saying that because I believe that he should be fired. I unequivocally do not believe that Mike McDaniel should be on the hot seat at all. It is not something that I believe. He is a coach that I like. He is bright. He is absolutely the kind of head coach that deserves the investment of an organization, right? He deserves that kind of investment. What I do not believe is that the Miami Dolphins are an organization that is going to be patient to continue to give him that investment, especially when the guy that the team got in trouble for trying to hire in the offseason, he's not even making overtures that he's open to the idea of coming back. Sean Payton, who this team, who Steve Ross sent his affiliates out to recruit, to bring in as the head coach of this team for this upcoming season. Steve Ross went out of his way to try to bring Sean Payton in, okay? And it didn't work out. It all fell apart. He is out there outright saying he's building a staff. He's building a staff right now to bring in to whatever organization wants to have him in the NFL next season. It's happening. The wheels are turning. It's beginning. The process is beginning. Okay? Here's what I'm going to say. I firmly believe, and again, I don't believe it is something that is deserved at all. But Steve Ross And Chris Greer desperate for his job if this team that he constructed misses the playoffs somehow? I absolutely believe that Steve Ross and Chris Greer will sacrifice Mike McDaniel to bring in Sean Payton and Vic Fangio and that staff of coaches into Miami next season. I absolutely believe it. And if you don't believe that that is something that is out there as a possibility, you have simply not been paying attention to this organization and this franchise. Okay. And again, let me be clear, as if I haven't already. I don't believe that that is a deserved fate for Mike McDaniel, no matter what. If the Dolphins drop the last 2 games, I absolutely believe that Mike McDaniel deserves that opportunity to come back and continue building this team. Absolutely. Okay. Let me be clear. But I have no faith in Steve Ross, and I have no faith in Chris Greer. And it would surprise me not at all. In fact, I would be more surprised if the Dolphins failed to make the playoffs. I would be more surprised if Mike McDaniel came back than I would be if he was let go.
Well, you're going
That's how I
in.
feel.
You're really going in.
If you've been paying attention, our organization is run by literal, I'm going to swear, literal fucking clowns.
Yeah. I don't think, first off, I think the Sean Payton thing sailed. I think if Sean Payton's looking around with an all-star staff, I think he's looking at, other situations where he doesn't have to go in and win the Super Bowl in year 1 for it to be deemed a success. So I'd be looking at a situation like Cleveland. I'd be looking at, potentially other situations around the league. We don't know what's going to happen in Indianapolis or, but if he comes to Miami after they fire Mike McDaniel, then he's got no cap situation. He's probably stuck with Tua, so he can't bring in his own quarterback, and he's got a limited window to win with no draft picks. The time to get him was last year. I just don't think. I think at this point, Chris Greer has. First off, if somehow Mike McDaniel got fired, but Chris Greer saved his job, that would just be incredible. So if you fire Mike McDaniel, then you're admitting that was a bad hire, which means that Chris Greer got 2 head coaching hires and failed. I just don't think I just don't think that's where they're at right now as an organization. I think when they made the move to bring in Mike McDaniel, and they made the moves that they made, Chris Greer was basically like, this is my shot. This quarterback has to prove that we can win. We've got to win on a small window. And I think he hitched his wagon to Mike McDaniel, and he hitched his wagon to Tua Tagovailoa. And it was this year and next year were basically guarantees. And then from there, with a bunch of expiring contracts and a lot of decisions to make, that would be the logical place where you would clean house if it's not working out. So the same way in where I've said over the last few weeks, in many respects, this roster is the roster. You're going to see some minor things. You're probably going to see the team go out and add a piece to the offensive line. You may see them go out and add a running back. They may
tight end.
Yeah, they'll probably go out and get a tight end, and they'll probably backload some contracts and restructure some deals to fit everything in so that they can go all into next year. I think next year is total job save mode for these guys, and I know we've been here before. This is what I was saying when the Dolphins traded for Bradley Chubb, was that once again, the Dolphins, a fringe playoff team, got a lot of heat for saying this team was a fringe playoff team, and they're sitting at 8-7 with 2 weeks to go.
Yep.
They are a fringe playoff team. They went all in on Tua. They went all in on Mike McDaniel, and they went all in on the top half of this roster. They don't have the draft picks. They don't have the cap space. There are very mild things that they can do to make some tweaks. But for the most part, this roster is what it is, and they've got to figure it out. And we're going to see what the ceiling of this roster with this coaching staff is over the next couple of weeks. And then, with the small changes, whether they bring in an experienced defensive coordinator, they bring in a couple of extra pieces, we'll see what this team does next year. At this point, hard to sit here and say that this team is going to reach their goals. When you made that trade for Bradley Chubb and you gave him all the money that you gave him, you were telling your fan base, we're ready to contend, not to make the playoffs, not to simply win a game in the playoffs and make a run. You're telling your fan base that you're ready to contend for a Lombardi trophy. At 8-7 right now, it is hard to sit here and tell you that the Dolphins are contending for a Lombardi trophy. Things might look different a couple weeks from now. I'm not willing to sit here and say that the season is over, but it's on life support.
We said after the Buffalo game that the lug nuts were getting loose. And at this point, that wheel it's fallen off. The wheels are falling off this season.
The margin for error is gone. You said, like, the last few weeks, I've made jokes about the fan base and about you getting emotional, saying that the Chargers game was a must-win. Then somehow, even though the Chargers game was a must-win, suddenly the Buffalo game was not a must-win. Then the Green Bay was a must-win to some fans and not a must-win for others. This game against New England, this is a must-win.
Yeah.
Like, you can't go into New England and beat that team that's reeling to secure your spot in the playoffs.
You want to talk about finding ways to lose
you're
games.
not going anywhere. And even
about
if you win, like I said prior to this game, there is nothing that the Dolphins can do to prove that they are not the same old Dolphins right now until they get to like the second round of the playoffs. Then they've got a test to prove that they're not the same old Dolphins. But the Dolphins can definitely prove that they're the same old Dolphins by going out and losing on Sunday. To many, they probably have already proven it. To us, I think they've probably already proven it. They've got a very slim chance to turn this thing around, but the margin for error is gone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There is absolutely no margin for error for this team at anymore this season. I mean, the fact of the matter is, they're the same old Dolphins at best at this point, unless somehow the Colts turn this thing around and find a way to beat the Chargers tonight, which would keep the 6th spot open as a possibility.
It doesn't matter if you get the 6th spot.
But I mean, what I'm saying, what I'm telling you, that's not happening. The Ravens are not losing 2 games, and the Dolphins may win 2 games, but I think the 5 spot is gone at this point. The likeliest scenario is that the Dolphins are, if they make the playoffs, they're making the playoffs as the 7th seed. They're probably going to Kansas City. They've got to find a way to beat the Chiefs in Kansas City in the first round of the playoffs. And then that's how they've got to prove that they're not the same old Dolphins. They've got to go into, if you go into Kansas City and you win that game in wild card weekend after what we've just witnessed, if they, I mean, and I don't have the sound effect queued up, but I've been talking to somebody about, might need to get the sound effect of a garbage truck backing up, because that's how the Dolphins, if they make the playoffs, are going to get into the playoffs. They're going to back into the playoffs. So we'll play the beep, 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 beep. We're backing up. We're backing up into the playoffs. If the Dolphins back into the playoffs, they've got to win not just once in Kansas City. They've got to win again in the divisional round for us to really see something. It would be really impressive. I'm not going to lie and say it wouldn't be impressive if they make it in as the 7th seed and go into Kansas City and win. That would be a really impressive thing to do. But I'm not holding my breath at this point. I would be. I don't
know that they're
stunned.
playing Kansas City to be.
What's that?
I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Kansas City, whether you're talking about Buffalo, whether you're talking about Cincinnati. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. Those three teams, when you look at the hierarchy of teams in the AFC, there is a clear delineation. The Bills, Chiefs, and Bengals are the three best teams in the AFC.
Yes.
And then there is everybody else.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think we say this every year on this show. There are three tiers of teams in the NFL. There are your legitimate contenders. There are your teams that are legitimately awful. And then there's everybody else that falls in that range of 9-7.
I guess now it's 10-7 to 7.
10-7, 7-10. All of the teams in that area are the same kind of team that maybe gets a little bit of luck, goes this way or the other. And that's the difference between being 7-10 and 10-7, right? Sometimes you get a team that's super lucky and they're the Minnesota Vikings and they end up where they are at this point in the season, with all of that going on. But I'm not, the Dolphins are truly in same old Dolphins territory here. They're currently 8-7 with 2 games to play. To be clear, at the beginning of the season, I said the Dolphins would finish 10-7 and miss the playoffs. At this point, 10-7 would get them into the playoffs. There's no way they could finish 10-7 and not make the playoffs at this point. But regardless, they're not in that tier above where they had a lot of people believing they were in that tier. And to be clear, this is why in October and November, when we've got people telling us, you got to change the name of your show. Got to change the name of your show. This is why you don't take victory laps in October and November. Because those games in October and November, they're not the same as games that are played in December and January. Because in December and January, that's when teams start to catch up. And that's when everybody is playing with their lives on the line. And let me tell you what, with the exception of that Buffalo game, the Dolphins have not looked like a team that is playing with their season on the line. And we're going to get into it when we do our preview show for the New England game later this week. But if they don't come out desperately and playing football like their season is on the line, then I don't know what to tell you, because it's at that point now. The margin for error is gone. The comfort level of sitting at 8-3 and thinking that you're going to cruise into the playoffs is gone. You're, as Mike says, we're on the brink of a historic collapse for the Miami Dolphins. I mean, it's right there.
Did you want to talk about that comparison? You
to 1993? Yeah, let's talk about it.
Because I think this is worse.
I mean, you might. I think you've got an argument. Let me
because that team went 9-2 and then lost their last 5 games to miss the playoffs. This team was 8-3 on top of the division, on top of the conference, and potentially misses the playoffs if they lose 5 or 6 straight games. First off, if you lose 6 straight games, that's worse than 5 straight games. That's just simple math. Not a math guy, but that's pretty simple to figure out. But this is the reason that it's worse regardless of that. That team in 1993 lost Dan Marino 5 games into the season and then went out and traded for a 39-year-old Steve DeBerg to come in and helm the ship because they didn't believe in Scott Mitchell. So you had Scott Mitchell, Steve DeBerg, and Doug Peterson as your 3 quarterbacks when you were 9-2 and then you lost the last 5 games of the season. You have at this point the quarterback that only a few weeks prior was considered to be in the MVP voting,
100%.
led all of the fan votes in the Pro Bowl.
Yep.
Still technically at this point leads the NFL in passer rating.
Yay!
And if he gets concussed, then and he misses the last 2 games of the season, then maybe you can say, okay, well, then you can draw some comparisons. But like, the damage has already been done. They've already lost 4 games in a row without, with their starting quarterback, without having to deal with the issues that 93 Dolphins team, which, by the way, that 93 Dolphins team, probably the best Dolphins team that they've had here. That probably the best Dolphins team that Marino ever had. And if you need any evidence for it, all you have to do is know that they were 9-2 without Dan Marino,
Right.
with Steve DeBerg and Scott Mitchell. If this team continues to slide and does not make the playoffs, this is the worst collapse in Miami Dolphins history.
There it is. So you're saying that there it is, man. So, man, Jesus, we got double, triple reverse here by the Chargers going on. I'm distracted over here while the Dolphins are collapsing. And
I'm 2 gin and soda waters in. So,
yeah, God, yeah, it's a bad deal. Yeah, as somebody said in the chat, and I don't know that I want to necessarily bring it up again because we talked about it already, but basically, and because I'm going to talk about it with Go Time Dolphins, but he basically says, you look at the 3 teams at the top of the AFC: Kansas City Chiefs, Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals. What do those teams have?
An elite quarterback.
An elite quarterback.
You want to look at the number 4 seed currently in the AFC?
Who's that?
The Jacksonville Jaguars.
Listen, that was another question that I wanted to ask. Step out of it for a second, for just a minute. Which team would you rather be right now? The Miami Dolphins or the Jacksonville Jaguars? Which organization would you rather be right now? The Miami Dolphins or the Jacksonville Jaguars? All things considered. All things.
I think the Dolphins have a better opportunity to win in the next year or 2. But you obviously have to feel better about Trevor Lawrence than you do about Tua right now. And that means that the arrow is pointing way up for Jacksonville, who still has a couple more years. They have an extra year of Trevor Lawrence on a rookie deal to make something happen here over the next couple of seasons, where the Dolphins are running out of time. Because that was always the plan. Always the plan was you win when Tua is still on the rookie deal before you have to pay your franchise quarterback. Well, Jacksonville has a year up on that, and Trevor Lawrence looks like he's figured it out. So Jacksonville has really a 2-year window of having Trevor Lawrence extremely cheap, and a 3rd year where he'll be on the 5th-year option. So I think long term, I would much rather be Jacksonville than Miami. I just think Miami right now has a better roster than Jacksonville. It's just the question of whether or not you believe that they can win with Tua. And I think at this point, it's this year or next year, and I think they've built themselves a short window. They're going to have a very top-heavy roster, so they better figure this thing out because they're running out of time.
That's right. The window could really, really close in a hurry. So it's a rough situation. Deal is not great, but before we get out of here, Brain, we gotta ask the question. We gotta do the thing. So let's do it.
Let me check your pulse if you're not fired up.
That's right. It is time once again for a Miami Dolphins pulse check. This is where you tell us how you are feeling about the Miami Dolphins right now in one word. So if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know how you're feeling about the Miami Dolphins right now in one word. If you're on the I Am a Miami Dolphin Fan Facebook page, thank you for watching over there. Leave it in the comments. Tell us know how you are feeling about the Miami Dolphins in one word right now, because it's time to have that conversation. We have asked that conversation to a lot of people, and we've gotten some answers here in the chat, watching live on YouTube, the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel, and the I'm a Miami Dolphin Fan Facebook page. But Brain, I want to hear from you. What is your one word pulse check right now?
Look, the walls are closing in. The pundits are getting loud. The trolls are getting louder. Everybody's looking for answers. And the margin for error is gone. The Dolphins right now are cornered. And they're either going to succumb to the forces or they're going to come out fighting. And if they come out fighting, they're either going to come out victorious and have overcome all of these obstacles and shocked a lot of people, or they're going to have fought valiantly and just fallen short. But at this time, this is gut check time, because you're cornered and there ain't nowhere to go.
Yeah.
All eyes are on you, and the time is now. So
yeah,
we're going to find out what this team is made of. And like, there's nothing else to say. They're cornered. And some would say that when a team is cornered, or when a person is cornered, that's when they're at their most dangerous. We'll find out. We'll see what this Dolphins team looks like when they're cornered. Is this the kind of team that is dangerous, like that Chargers team that we faced a couple weeks ago when they were cornered and their backs were to the wall? Or are they going to be like many Dolphins teams in the past have been, a team that just folds and withers and just doesn't have enough, just doesn't have it in their tank? We'll see. Everybody's got their opinion. Everybody in this day and age, everybody wants to be right. Everybody wants to be the first to say that this team was going to win, or the first to say that this team was going to lose, and the first to be right. I don't think it matters whether you're the first or you're the last. At the end of the day, we're going to find out the answer. And I think we're going to know the answer, not definitively on Sunday, but, well, we'll know it. I think we'll know it definitively if they lose.
Yeah.
But if they win, they'll still have some work to do. If they lose, I think we'll know the answer.
The joke is, even if they lose, they still can get in with a win over the Jets. So
at that point, that's where I'm saying I don't care, because I've seen enough. That's the point. If you can't go in, because if you need to rely on other,
even with the backup
win,
quarterback,
even with the backup quarterback, because then you're talking about, well, then New England's got to lose to Buffalo. Is Buffalo going to be playing for something? Are they not? Because if Buffalo loses to Cincinnati, then in all likelihood, Cincinnati's going to have the number 1 seed.
Well, Kansas City is still in line to have the number 1 seed. If Buffalo
no,
loses
because
to Cincinnati.
I guess if Kansas City wins and Cincinnati loses,
Kansas City has a better record at the moment.
Yeah. But at any rate, you're going to be sitting there in a situation where, Buffalo might go into that game against New England and not really have a ton to play for. But even if they do, like at the end of the day, given everything that this team has been through in this season, where they've been over the last month, if you can't go into New England and beat that team, I just don't think you can have any faith that this team's going to go into, whether it's Cincinnati, Buffalo, or Kansas City, and come away with a victory.
That's fair.
I think you've got the margin for error is 0, and the must wins begin now.
Here we go. So let's see what the people think. Jake McVeigh says he feels discouraged. DS9 from on Twitter says fart. The Navarone gun.
Can we give that a little bit? You're going to no-sell fart?
I mean, it's a valid feeling, wouldn't you say?
I think it's the most valid feeling.
How do I feel about the Miami Dolphins? Yeah. Patrick Mullen, he says reconstruct at hold _the_gate_ says hopeless. Mike says sad. Guy Corner says pensive. Jackie Lofton is distraught. Maria is worried. Mike Oliva is demoralized. Brian Moktiak is broken. David is cynical. Bella put it all in one word. Same old Dolphins. Josh Laser is deflated. Trevor Yates is shocked. Zolo77 is disgusted. Bill is depleted. T. Hutch says fraudulent. TC says fraudulent. Elliot Zavagian says numb. Oh, we got a lot of heartbroken. Whatever. Poop. Dreadlock Demon says poop. Martin Contreras says accustomed, which I think is a fair one.
I think poop comes next week. I think right now we're at fart, but next week you could be at poop.
Oh man. Let's see what else do we have here. Let's go. Let me get back into our chat over here. Okay. Golski says numb. Terry Trask says frustrated. Cherie Gillette says sad. Douglas Potter says hopeless. Walter Whitaker flatlined. Anthony Bazzuto redundant. Alan is feeling frustrated. Sean Lucas is nervous. Steve Malloy is in limbo. Peter Harris is heartbroken. James Campbell is confused. Keith H. disgusted. Sam Kavason is devastated. Dario Sanchez is heartbroken. Kevin Sean Hans is disgusted. Nando Boom Torres is disappointed. So is John Stahlberger. Kipper Doug is taking it to the next level, feeling suicidal. Bill Callis is depressed. Sean Lucas is sad. Ralph Taliento is disappointed. Jay Conrad is feeling screwed. Sean Lucas is dissatisfied. Victor Lozano is tired. Craig Fleming befuddled. Brandon Stager says revenge. And Brandon, I think that's a great place to keep it, because if this team is going to do anything, boy, they got to act like they want some revenge. They got to do something. They got to show us some fight.
Are we gonna play the Junior Seau clip from 2003? These guys are out for some kind of vengeance.
Yeah, well, I mean, we got to be out for something, and that brings me to my pulse check. Desperate. It's desperation time. You know, Tua said in his post-game press conference that it's not time for these guys to blink. And maybe he's right. They can't blink, but they got to play like there's something on the line, because it is. Because all that they worked for, all that they did to get to that 8-3 record that had them sitting there at the top of the league and had them feeling like they were a team that deserved to be in the conversation as legitimate contenders. Well, now they got to play like they're desperate. And that's how I'm feeling as a Dolphin fan. I am desperate for this team to show me something. Show me something. Do something to hold off this collapse. It is bad right now. Everything is bad. Everything is going haywire. It's all falling apart at the seams. But at the end of the day, there is a world where if two results go the right way, the Dolphins beat the Patriots on Sunday and the Seahawks beat the Jets, that your Miami Dolphins clinch a playoff spot. And as Raheem Mostert said, once we get into the postseason, everybody's going to have to be afraid of us, or I'm paraphrasing. But here's the thing, Raheem, first we got to get there.
First, you got to hold on to the ball and not fumble before halftime.
Right. First, you got to hold on to the ball.
And then you got to run the right route in the second half.
People got to look out.
And then you got to make the playoffs.
He might hit him with the football. You never know. But yes, here's the thing. It's all right there. It's still all in front of them. As you said at the beginning, they still control their destiny. It's still right there. You can still go forward. You can still get into the dance. And once you're in the dance, anything is possible. I'm not holding my breath. I don't know that I'm expecting that. But if they can get there, Anything is possible. So one step at a time. Stop the bleeding. Go out on Sunday. Let's get the win, and we'll take it from there. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, Dolphins still control their own destiny in terms of making it into the playoffs. So let's see if they can do it. And that's going to wrap us up for this episode of the Same Old Dolphin Show. A little extra long episode of the Same Old Dolphin Show, but we did it. We got through it. There was a lot to talk about. There was a lot of emotion. There is always a lot of emotion. People in the comments saying, we don't know what we're talking about. You're crazy. You don't know this, that, and the other thing. Listen, you might not agree with where we're coming from, but as I have said before, and I will say it again, my experience as a Dolphin fan has been one where this team has let me down time and time again. And I have seen our idiotic front office do all kinds of stupid things in my time as a fan. So if you don't think there's any chance they move off of the head coach this season, fine. But you don't get to tell me that my experience with this idiotic front office and ownership is invalid, because I've experienced it. And trust me, you may not agree that Steve Ross is a clown, but that's not going to change my opinion. He's a clown. Chris Greer, clown. He's a clown, and he is unbelievable at keeping his job. I'll give him that. I'll tip my hat to him. He is amazing at keeping his job. But here we go. We're here. We've seen it all. At the end of the day, we're all Dolphin fans. All of us want to see this team win, right? We all want to see them win. We all want to see them not be the same old Dolphins. As of right now, they are full steam ahead to the same old Dolphins finish of the season. They got Kyle Krabs, of all people. That's a guy who constantly is trying to stay positive about this team. And he named his post-game wrap-up show on the Packers game. He named it Same Old Dolphins. So
we made it, baby.
So don't come after us. They are who they are until they're not. See pinned tweet at Same Old Dolphins. See the pinned tweet. Nothing would make me happier than to be able to unpin that tweet. Nothing.
Next week, we're going to get a bunch of people telling us to unpin that tweet.
Yeah. We'll see. I'm not holding my breath. Not holding my breath, baby. I'm also not interested in hearing, even if the Dolphins go into Foxboro and lay the smackdown on the Patriots, which would there be nothing better than Teddy Bridgewater leading the Dolphins to a 30-point victory over the Patriots, and all the hell that would unleash on the Dolphins fan base. That would be unbelievable. But anyway, Brian, any parting words for the people before we get out of here?
No, nothing that we haven't said. Just look, it all looks like it's crashing down around us. And it might be. It really might be. The time is nigh. The time is right now, actually, for this team to turn it around. If they're going to turn it around, they're going to turn it around this week. And we'll see what happens. All I can say is kind of, whether you want to enjoy the ride, commiserate in the ride that it is, where we're at, where we're going, like, it's all pretty clear right now. There's very little that the Dolphins can do. They've made their gamble on for the most part, this roster. They can pivot the coach if they really want to, but everything there is fixable to a certain extent. We just got to see if they're good. Like right now, the quarterback is not good enough. The defensive coordinator is not good enough.
No.
And the healthy players on the defensive side of the ball aren't good enough. So it's hard to have very much faith at this point. But if you want to have faith in this team, whether it's this year with the roster as it's currently constituted, or next year for what this roster is going to be, you need this team to bounce back right now and see what they're made of. Because if this team folds right now, then I don't know how you go into next year feeling any kind of positive.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Thank you all for joining us tonight on the Same Old Dolphins Show. We appreciate you coming along for the ride all season long. We've got at least 2 weeks left. We'll be back later this week to preview the first game of 2023 as the Dolphins will take on the Patriots on New Year's Day in Foxboro. Thank God December is over. 0-4 in December. That December curse continues for the Miami Dolphins. But we'll be back later this week. Thanks again, as always, for listening, for watching. Share, like, and subscribe. Smash the like button. We appreciate you all very much. And hey, remember, there's no wrong way to love your football team. Take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, go Dolphins!
They did the thing. They did the thing.